Good evening. Welcome to the Waunakee Community School District Board of Education regular meeting. Tonight is Monday, February 13th, 2017. The time is 7:03. We started actually and went into closed session at 6:30 pursuant to Wisconsin State Statutes 1985, parent 1, C, E, and F to discuss issues relevant for closed session. We are now in open session. Let's see, item number 5 on the agenda, approval of the minutes. You'll see in your packet minutes from the January 11th, 16th, I'm sorry, from the January 9th, 17, and January 16th, 17 special meeting for your review and approval.
Move approval as submitted.
Moved and seconded. Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Any changes to the agenda?
As written.
Motion to approve of the agenda, please.
So moved.
Second.
Mark, seconded by Jack. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 7, public comments. I do have an item here from Gina Pagel and Cindy Lindquist who'd like to address the board. I love my public schools week.
So good evening. We just wanted to let you know how we're celebrating our public schools this week. And we do have extra copies of these little selfie sheets. I'm going to be posting this on Facebook later today. And we're going to be posting the opportunity for teachers across the district to do it in their own buildings this week. And we do have extras if you're interested in posting or just reflecting about why you love your public schools. And so across the nation this week, community members and teachers and kids are just reflecting about all the great things that happen in our public schools. And so I'll just share mine. I wrote, I love my public school because I believe that every child, no matter their zip code, deserves a bright future.
And I put, I love my public school because all students are welcome, included, and valued. So it's just a little statement about what makes our public schools so great, and it's a positive thing to hear right now. So.
And the agenda item that they linked this to is the legislative update, because all things legislative these days, we're talking about schools.
Yeah, we're not
public.
And so
thinking of
as
this
we're-
as political, but
Right.
that's what we're
That
looking
you wanted to tie to something in the
Right.
agenda, yes.
So these are the back tables?
Okay, that's great. Thank
Thanks,
you very
ladies.
much. Are there any other items that people want to address the board on relative to tonight's agenda? As always, you're welcome to come to any of our regular board meetings to do so. On to item 8, administrative reports, starting with our student reports. And Michaela, are you?
Hello, so like I said the last meeting, January was our big month for JDRF. So we had a really successful turnout this year. And just this last Tuesday, we had a Scooby night and we worked from 5 to 8, and I would say it was really successful overall. So that was really nice.
Yeah, and then about 2 weeks ago, we had a blood drive, and we were able to get 64 collections of pints of blood. So that's going to save about 192 lives. So then we're also going to have another blood drive April 11th and 12th at high school.
April 11th and 12th, you said? Yep. Okay.
And then we also had a family fitness night recently, and we volunteered at that, and that was a lot of fun, and I think the kids really enjoyed that.
So then last Saturday, we had our Cupid Shuffle dance, or winter formal. And I think it was one of our most successful turnouts for it. We sold about 370 tickets, so we made a lot of profit for the after them. That's pretty much everything that we've done since we last came here, but we're gonna.
Yep,
Have
future
another blood
things,
drive,
we
yeah.
said the blood drive, we're going to a state conference that the student council goes to, and that's really fun. We get to meet with the other student councils and discuss like ideas for the school and stuff. That's not till later.
Yeah, that's like in May, but yeah, we're gonna have some blood drive, open mic night, and just some other fundraising, parking raffle events coming up, so.
Any questions or comments? Thanks again for your
Awesome.
update.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 2, State Convention Report. A few of us attended the State School Board Convention in January, and so this is the time when the school board members might to share some of the things that you learned. Who wants to start? Gary?
I can, I guess, yeah. Went to some funding classes or seminars, whatever you want to call them. That was interesting in that it's confusing. The voting with the delegate stuff was interesting. Voted along the lines we did. It was interesting to see some of the things that got voted down and how districts differ. There was, the most contention was the gun law, probably.
Yep.
That was one. Transgender was one. Another interesting thing, just as a take on it, you have committees there that go and do stuff. And one of them was, one of the delegate things was to let schools increase to the average state spending. So they wanted to have that, so they could increase their own revenue cap if they wanted. And right away, all the schools, the people that formed it only wanted to go to $100 or $200 to get something. But the rest always want to go higher than that. And then they know, the board, the committee knew the legislature will never go as high as they want. So they're trying to get something to start with, and the rest of them just blew it out of the water. So it's another example where your committee does all this work, has a lot of discussion, and does some good work on something, and then it goes to a vote, and they blew it out of the water. There was two different things that kind of happened that way. So it was very interesting.
Was it, you were talking about the Policy and Resolutions Committee of WASB, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, the Policy and Resolutions set up a couple of those
Okay.
and tried to just get a little something
I
to
hear
get
you.
it started.
Okay.
And then the other ones wanted the whole enchilada, and then it all failed. Just interesting.
As I kind of reflected on the experience, really just in the last couple days, you go and then there's always something you kind of glean. And I guess, the individual sessions are always valuable, important, and as things come up here, they're back in your brain and you can kind of bring them up. But I think it's kind of the big picture that I took away. And one thing is how grateful I am for this board and this administration and the respect that we all show each other. We can agree or we can disagree. And that isn't true everywhere. And as you sit around in those more informal settings and you get to talk to other boards and what's happening in their district, it just causes me great reflection of how really lucky and what a great place we have here. And the second thing that I just, kind of the big picture item that I walked away with really came from one of the general sessions, and it was the homeless to Harvard girl. And I think we have to, as a kind of group effort, realize we don't know who and we don't know what adult is going to make the difference to any individual. And this girl, just by perseverance, but it took that special kind of connection to an adult in the building that really pulled her out and made her the person she is. And I think that we have just such power, and we need to value all of our adults and all of the employees we have in our district, because we don't know which one is going to make that difference. So we do a great job here.
I, like Gary, went to some of the funding seminars and trying to get a better understanding of the funding mechanism for schools, and it is complicated. And it seems like there could be some changes that help help us make better budget decisions going forward. But I think, when you look at a conference like this, it's meeting and connecting with other board members, around the state and people on the committee, and just understanding, what, building that network of people and that understanding of different boards, so that when things like mental health crisis comes up, we can lean upon these other people and trying to get a consortium of people to make a difference. So that's valuable when I go to conferences for me to make those connections.
And I'll dovetail along with that. One of the pre-convention workshops that I went to was on pediatric brain development, and it was by Dr. Brian Fidlin, who's actually a clinical psychologist in the Milwaukee area. So the title was a bit misleading because I thought it was going to be a bunch about little kids, but he deals a lot with obviously mental health issues, but also the effect of drugs and opioids on the brain. And so he talked a lot about how those habits and those pathways, and how mental health issues like depression, if they're allowed to continue, how it actually rewires and affects how the brain prunes itself, so that it goes down very negative hallways, and what kinds of interventions are helpful in getting that unlocked and turned back around. So that part was fascinating. I think he would be an excellent resource. It's certainly a timely topic, and from what he sees, kids are under a lot of stress, like we've all talked about and heard about before. And so that's what's at the root of these things. It's not the drug problem. It's all the stress and the mental health issues that make people turn to drugs as an outlet to self-medicate. So that one was great. I also really liked the keynote by Dr. David Horsigan on trust and the importance of trust in organizations, and what not having trust costs an organization. I'm curious, that's a topic that I'm wondering if at some point we would want to explore further. I thought that was fascinating. The Thursday breakfast speaker, Dr. Joanne Owens from Nebraska, was quite a dynamic woman, and she talked a lot about all the different ways that kids learn, and the importance of keeping activity and physical movement as part of that learning, and kind of up and moving around the room, and how that increases the brain engagement and so on. So that was a really fun one. And like Joan, I too was really struck by Liz Murray's presentation on the whole homeless to Harvard thing. I did buy the book, it's excellent. Joan's spoken for it first, but after that, I don't care if it makes the rounds. It is inspiring how kids can overcome even dire circumstances through no fault of their own that parents put them in, and the difference public schools and people in public schools can make in getting that turned around. So as fascinating as her talk was, the book was even better. Really happy to have an opportunity to get to go. The breakout session I probably enjoyed the most was one presented by CISA 7 Special Ed Director on UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and the idea of giving students multiple avenues to engage their learning, and realizing not all students learn one way. This often gets brought up in a topic and thinking that it's for special needs students only, but his talk really presented how it engaged and helps people on the other end as well, the gifted and talented and pathways type people. And so again, I would hope we could explore some of that to give students multiple ways of expressing their learning. That was another big aspect, not using just one form of assessment, and really tailoring all teaching and assessment to multiple avenues of how students learn. So again, just really glad I met.
Just a couple of highlights. I won't touch base on things that have already been said. The pre-conference workshop that I went to was on improving school board effectiveness, a balanced governance approach. It's really kind of a movement away from the policy governance model, which I was happy to hear. And it really is very similar to kind of how we function in a way. But what I have, what's interesting is that there were a variety of different tools that were provided, which, at some point, share appropriately with the board. And in terms of characteristics of highly effective boards and of evaluation tools and stuff, but similar to kind of echo what Joan was saying. I think the representation of different types of people that we have around this table is something that's also reflective of healthy boards. You don't want to have boards of education that are all one type of person. Like if they're boards with a majority of educators on the board or a majority of business people, they're all less effective. But this kind of framework that we've got lends itself to what I'm hoping, plus the fact that we choose to agree to disagree with respect. It's all good stuff. So, kind of kudos to this community for, I guess, electing us, but also for the way we choose to do this business. I also went to some sessions on scorecards, organizations, given our work kind of like on goal setting and stuff, so I'll have some examples I can share at some other point. I also provided a copy to everyone of the session by John Forrester, the SAA legislative update, just as an FYI for everybody, and we can talk about that later. And then the last one that I want to just highlight is something that's interesting. It really has to do with, ways that you can be better telling your story, beyond branding, living your vision and mission every day. What are the things that we can be doing as a district to tell our story? And there were some good examples from the Falls and other districts of what they're doing as part of their community engagement process to, for lack of a better word, market themselves. I mean, you need to be doing that. I think every organization we belong to today, the School Board Association, I think the WSPRO is the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association as well. Particularly, it's always good to let people know what you're doing, but particularly today with all the variety of attacks on public education, we've got so many good things to say, and the more that we can empower everyone in our community to help tell the story to legislators, the better we are as well. So, another good session. Echo all the other comments that were made. Yeah.
I do have one more. It was very exciting to see at the awards thing, Mr. Kurt get his award. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was nice to have him up there representing us. That was pretty neat. I got a picture on my phone if you really want to see it.
Kurt is the Student Services Director of the Year, Administrator of the Year for the state. So,
Very good.
good stuff.
Okay, anything else from administration you want to comment on, those of you who attended the conference?
I think it's very similar to the experiences you had. I know a lot of the value is for us to touch base with our colleagues and to really see what's going on around the state. Gives us an opportunity also to meet with many of our vendors all in one location and make some of those meetings really effective. I looked at things that were around student mental health and community engagement were a few of the things that I attended just to see kind of what was happening in other areas. Some of them are similar to what we're doing, and some of them have brought in some new ideas. So see where those things fit.
Okay, on to item 3. Not much really to say here other than today is the deadline for the superintendent evaluation to be submitted to Rebecca, and we are going to later on in the meeting schedule our evaluation special meeting to discuss the results of both our self-evaluation and the board superintendent evaluation. Any questions on that stuff? Okay, on to item C, strategic planning.
Yep. First item there is just, I think we've already touched on it a little bit with some of the upcoming dates that we have. Towards the end of our agenda, I'll run through the additional meetings that we set between us coming out of closed session and us starting our regular meeting here in open session. But just highlighting that next Monday from 5 to 7 at Heritage, we have our joint budget workshop with the administration, the board, and our district leadership team. Steve and I will be working tomorrow to really organize what some of those questions will be, but our hope is that becomes really a workshop setting where we can learn some of the pieces about how we can, what the impact of the governor's budget is on Waunakee, what are some things that we are watching, and then also what are some things that we see as needs, areas, requests going into the next budget cycle and beyond. So that's next Monday. We have, starts at from 5 o'clock until 7 at Heritage in the large group area. The other thing you will notice on the 90-day update is I'm going to start putting forth what we will be doing at our regular meetings with regards to our strategic planning updates. So you will see that we have something coming from our facilities planning and also Herb Halbrook from IT. Obviously tonight we're going to hear in just a few minutes about some of the things happening with strategic budget planning, which will lead very nicely into the conversations we have next week. So, but at the end of tonight's meeting, we'll add in the additional meetings that we are holding between now and really the end of March. I think that you're going to see that there's quite an agenda moving forward, and we'll have a lot of initiatives and discussion pieces that are important parts of that work.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, on to facility planning, Warrior Stadium.
Yeah, this item falls under our facility planning aspects of the strategic plan. This was a conversation that we've had around this table with regards to putting forth a process to review our needs at Warrior Stadium. This includes the field, the track, the lights, the scoreboard, really that larger complex, also some additional seating and storage. The Facilities Committee met this past week where they reviewed the materials that are being prepared for putting this out to bid. Rutler Corporation was present at the meeting and walked through really the scope of work. What you're seeing on the screen is just a rendering. It's not the most recent rendering. There's a few things with some of the words that have been pulled off that we just felt were extra. So those are a different rendition. I know Aaron, I see you're in the back. Aaron, some of the words have been changed. Is that basically the only change that we have from the rendering? So
Yeah, the words on the sidelines.
the words on the sidelines are removed. Is that correct? Yep. But the general theory being here that you can see that it's laid out from a perspective of football, boys and girls lacrosse. Boys and girls lacrosse have different lines. So that's 3 different sports that are laid out there. If we wanted to play other sports on there like soccer, there is the ability to paint them on with a water-soluble paint, then they dissolve at the next rain. I know Aaron had looked at how many different lines we could put on there, and then it just got pretty busy. So our primary focus was looking at the football and then the 2 lacrosse fields, and then with the options for other areas on a temporary basis. We're also looking at the track replacement and some of the work that goes into that. The lights, some changes that have come from our conversations in the lights is them really moving cost-wise in line with the LEDs being a very much more affordable option since we started looking at this, and then looking at the replacement of the scoreboard, which has given us quite a bit of challenges the last few years. So the documents that you're seeing really don't really deviate from that. They are just showing how we're going to go out to bid, what the specifics are that need to be bid out for this aspect of work. The Facilities Committee has reviewed it and has recommended it to the board for your approval. From a timeline standpoint, we are moving this forward very quickly. If you approve it this evening for us to go out to bid, then we will be getting those out this week. Our intent then is to have the results back for review by the board at the March 13th meeting. We set, during when we were talking about meetings previously this evening, March 27th was another date we are putting out there as a special meeting in order to, if you're not comfortable on the 13th, to accept the bids as they come in and want some additional time to digest them. We would like to put out the 27th of March as an option. We feel, though, that if we get beyond March 27th, it really pushes our timeline from a construction schedule and when student activities begin on this site in the fall. We felt that the timeline does fit very well if everything is approved. Breaking ground in late May and then the completion in those first few weeks in August. There's two different aspects of it being bid out, so we will receive numbers on both a grass field and a synthetic field. So those are the pieces that would be part of the bid package. The additional seating on both sides of the grandstands on the home side are an alternate bid. We wanted to get a cost down as well. So what you're being asked tonight is, you're not approving the project, you're just approving these, really, these drawings and this concept to go out to bid so that we can see the numbers. Mark?
And if it goes to the artificial field,
Yes.
will the number include whatever maintenance equipment we need to maintain that field?
Yes, yes. I believe it's some of the, there's a grooming machine, I believe,
Right.
and that's part of that as well.
Okay.
Yes, Julie?
I'm just curious to hear from some of the members on the facility committee, without diving in too deep, what the discussion was like in terms of how you scaled the scope of the project and what it was like in collaborating with the booster groups, what maybe some of the gives and takes were in terms of determining what's put on the bid sheet.
Yep. And then maybe, Aaron, can I just call you up for just a minute too? And I welcome the other members to speak as well, but I know Aaron's done some conversations with the other booster groups to try to get some input on that as far as different dialogues.
Did you hear the question?
Yeah.
So you want to know like what conversations we had, or?
Yeah, what were some of the conversations that kind of went into the scope of work as far as with some of the other related booster groups that would benefit from the field?
Okay. Oh, so yeah, we talked, well, first conversation was if we went to a turf field, artificial turf field, if we want to talk about that one, because that's the largest cost of any of the things, it's just the sheer number of more activities and more groups that could use it. In terms of the lines that went on there, we looked at what we currently had in district in terms of fields. Two, we looked at groups that wanted to be a part of it. We have a very good soccer program. They also have their own field lights, their own press box, their own concession stands. They kind of felt like that was their home and their place to be. But we definitely have a space now for them if they do need to come down and use it for something, or if they have youth groups that want to use it on weekends. That was part of that talk, but those were kind of the conversations that were held last school year, winter and spring at that time. But we sat down with the youth groups for lacrosse, for football, for soccer, and those groups we talked about bringing them in and how this would benefit them. We looked at just where things were on the maintenance schedule, and some things were just past due, whether it was the lights or the track. Is that answering the question then?
I think that's part of it. I think we've also talked about other uses being both like our marching band right now, because right now their marching field is the primary, is a stadium field. When that has had a lot of rain, they get moved to different places, which none of those are really conducive, so this is a benefit there. And then just the community aspect as far as what other types of community groups, potential things for like drum and bugle corps, et cetera, to come in where there would be a place that wouldn't have an impact on the field. Some of the things that we were also shared, Todd Scheffler is the chair of the group that's raising additional funds for the synthetic turf. Right now, they have bids for $564,000. And they've worked with numerous of the groups. Some of the larger donors are the groups that Aaron spoke to with regards to lacrosse and the Touchdown Club. And then additionally, individual businesses and individual donors. That campaign is continuing all the way up until the March meetings that we hold. So there's anticipation that additional funds will be bid at the facilities committee. It was also discussed, since Todd was at that meeting, just to give an update to the committee as far as where they were. The committee has moved this further discussion on to our budget committee, so we can talk a little bit more in specifics as far as how the dollars are associated with the district and what kind of dollars the funding group is gathering, so. I know, Joe, you asked for the committee members to speak, and I just kept talking, so I'm happy to have them share
I'm
their
just,
perspective.
you know, we appreciate the collaboration with all of our booster groups, and I don't know that the community, whether they really realize how much their efforts support all of our co-curricular programs. This is a huge effort. So how we balance that out in terms of discussion, in terms of what they want and what we're committing to, you know, it's really important that that dialogue be free, open, cordial, but yet, you know, everybody, I'm just curious how the committee felt that work and that relationship was going and evolving, that's all.
I think it's going fine. There, how do you say this? When I look at this whole project, it's easy. We can replace the grass. We have that to do that. That's what we're promoting. If we want to take this next step, the community has offered to step up, and these groups, they've done a great job. They're right now they have bids isn't the right word. What's the bid?
Yeah,
they have
Estimates.
pledges or
Pledges.
cash in place.
Okay.
That's what that
That's-
was.
okay,
You look
that's-
confused there with that. It's,
Yes,
it's
okay.
pledges. They have that already in place.
Okay.
And what we talked about, different members on facilities before was having in place, getting this new turf, and then setting up to replace
Sustainable,
Yeah.
so in the future.
in 10 to 12 years. So
Correct.
we're working on that yet, and
Okay.
that's, it depends on how that all comes in. But it's not just looking at right now, it's looking at the future, and then there's these added on things, which we need to see some costs on to see what you can do right away and whatever. So it's,
Yeah,
So there's still puts and takes in terms of all of
There's
that,
definitely
the discussion
puts and
continues
takes
to
on
evolve.
Yeah.
this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
I think, you know, at the end of the day, what you can do is raise the money for the turf and scoreboard, and the, you know, requirements. But if you see in this plan here, there's bleacher extensions, things like that. So depending upon, you know, the money that's raised,
What's
it's
a want
really
and what's a need.
what's
Yeah.
a want and what's a need.
Yeah,
And,
we-
so I think those things are being evaluated, and, you know, I think these people are on track, you know, basically, you know, what we said is, you know, we want replacement, so that at the end of the day, you know, it doesn't necessarily fall on the school district. And, you know, I think they all get the message, and they're charging forward with that goal.
and I think one of the things, whether it was facility committee or when I first got here last year and myself and Randy meeting with this community group, we're pretty clear about what the priority, that the priority list was being developed by Randy, by Joe, by
Great,
that, and then this is what we're, and then the board, the school board, the facility committee saying, this is what we're willing to commit to, a grass field, light replacement, a basic scoreboard. And then, if you would like to go to that next step, that has to come from a community, outreach or community.
good, perfect, that's.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
Appreciate it. So what you're doing is you're basically asking for general concept approval, but more so that we can go out and get what the costs are gonna be, so everybody knows what we're working
We're
on.
looking to take the concept that's in your packet tonight and move it forward to bids. That would then be brought back to the facilities committee and the board.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve of this proposal?
Second.
Moved and seconded. We'll give it to Mark. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Thank you. Strategic budget planning.
So our next item is one of our larger boxes on our strategic plan is really dealing with the analytical budget process. Steve has put together some information that's really laying out a newer process for us. He shared some of this with the budget committee the last time we were together, and he's going to be walking you through some of the items that will give you a good base as far as the work that's occurring in this area, and I think it's also a good precursor to the discussions we'll be having next week. So turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Randy. Would it help if I turned off the front lights?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the following areas, how this connects to our strategic planning process. We're going to go over our improved budget planning process that we're utilizing this spring. We're going to talk a little bit about the timeline. I'm going to show some examples of what does this new process look like, and then we're going to talk about some goals as we move forward into the future. First of all, we're trying to connect these presentations so you see where they fall within the strategic planning process. So under the budget and finance area, I have already provided a presentation last fall on internal controls. This one is on the box underneath that called Analytical Planning, all under the budget and finance category, specifically with the strategic budget planning in mind. So to begin with, we approach this budget cycle this spring with the goal of improving the process compared to what we've used in the past. In the past, we have had multiple separate budget planning documents that we were combining to create a single comprehensive document that includes all of the budget planning information. So the budget committee had the opportunity to review the first draft of that comprehensive planning process late January, provided quite a bit of feedback for the suggestions for the second draft. The second draft will be ready for next Monday night's meeting with the staff, and it will be ready for review for the budget committee and the school board later on this month and during the March board meeting. So the improved planning process really utilizes very heavily the data provided by a product called Forecast 5 Analytics. So our district purchases a license from this company for both a product called 5Sight and a product called 5Cast. Forecast 5 as a company is owned by PMA Financial Services, which is the district's financial advisor that was selected for the 2014 referendum. The 5Sight product provides access to tremendous amounts of data, enrollment, financial, human resources, and academic data, all reported to the state of Wisconsin from schools across the state. 5Cast uses district data and statewide trends to project budget planning on a 5-year cycle. In October of 2016, we participated in the Forecast 5 National Conference that was located in Illinois. Districts from all across the country came together to really collaborate on best practices in budget planning. The sessions were really focused on finding opportunities to present data to the community and to identify areas within a district's budget for improvement. The interesting thing about Forecast 5 and this product is that the state of Wisconsin has been very slow to adapt. Other states like Illinois, California, the state of Washington are using this product on a very extensive basis. In Wisconsin, there were about 7 districts who participated in this conference in October. So it's still relatively new within Wisconsin to be using this type of product and trying to integrate it into a district's budget process. Switching gears to the timeline, Randy talked about the meeting that's scheduled for next Monday night. In addition, later on this month, the budget committee will be reviewing the second draft of the budget. The second draft will be presented to the board in March for recommended approval, and then we will begin moving through the process where you will see the first draft of the budget presented in May. So the political process, this is a state budget year, meaning that as school districts, we are not sure what the resources are going to be available to us after July 1st of 2017. But we certainly were hearing positive signs even before the governor's State of the State address Back in January, you can see the quote that came from the State of the State address, which called for a significant increase for public schools. Most public school district staff believe that that meant there might be $100 provided in the revenue cap formula for school districts. In fact, we were still receiving recommendations to do budgeting based on $0 increase, $50 increase, or $100 increase. But 100 was definitely viewed by folks in the education community as kind of the high-end increase for public schools. On February 8th, the governor delivered the budget address, which surprised most everybody in the education community by proposing a $200 per pupil increase in 2017-18, followed by an additional $204 in 2018-19. One very interesting element of that is the governor is proposing, continuing and increasing the per pupil categorical aid element of the state's very complicated school finance system instead of the more traditional equalization aid revenue cap formula system. So it's a different approach to how schools would be funded. The primary difference is that increase is fully funded by the state. And another major difference is all school districts are treated equally in this type of scenario. And property taxpayers, whether you're in a suburban Milwaukee district, suburban Madison, or a rural poor district, all receive the same level of state funding. In the equalized aid formula, as we all know, that's not the case. So through this type of funding mechanism, property taxpayers benefit significantly because there is no increase in the property tax levy that comes with it. It's fully paid by the state, and every school district ends up being treated the same, and their taxpayers are treated the same. Interestingly enough, the School Board Association really dove into the proposal and found there are a few catches, so to speak. This came from their document that they released late on the day, Friday. The School Board Association describes there are a couple of catches to the governor's proposal. Number one, in order to receive the additional funding, school districts are going to have to certify to the DPI that we are complying with Act 10, defined as following on the screen, which is basically related to health insurance. There are districts in the state who have yet to move their health insurance contribution to 12% for all employee groups. So those districts will have to make a decision as the additional funding is directly being tied to certifying the 12%. The second piece is an interesting one, that a portion of the governor's proposed increase in public schools is tied to the state of Wisconsin employees being required to switch to a self-funded health insurance model on January 1st of 2018. The budget is assuming savings which are then being turned around and provided to public schools. So you'll see there at the bottom of this slide, should the savings not materialize, the DPI is required to reduce the per pupil aid payments by $12 per pupil in 17-18 and $24 per pupil in 18-19. There are individuals very closely tied to the insurance world that are not 100% positive that the savings will materialize, especially in Dane County, which has some of the lowest cost of health insurance in the state of Wisconsin, which is the home to state government. And I think the governor's proposal is certainly acknowledging that the savings may not materialize by putting a clause in saying that if that doesn't happen, the funds are going to come back out from public schools. This does create timing challenges. because as you know, our budget is approved in October. So in October of '27, we would approve our budget without knowing what the outcome of this situation is. Per pupil aid does not come until the following spring, so that would allow the state to pull back funding come 6 months after our budget has already been approved, because we wouldn't have received it by then. So technically that would work. The state could pull the money back later on after we've already approved our budget. If this process goes through, it's very likely we would suggest to the board that we would hold back the $12 per pupil until we actually knew if it was going to happen. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense to spend it and then run the risk of 6 months later have it being pulled from you. So these pieces were really all tied to the per pupil increase. There were quite a few other proposals, but I didn't really want to get into those tonight. This is really the largest one when it comes to the school finance system. Julie?
So 2 questions. Do our district employees meet the 12% contribution to their health and benefits costs?
So currently it's at 88%, but moving forward, depending on the results of the health risk assessment participation this spring, we are changing our standard for the district to be 85%, which would be a 15% contribution, and staff have the ability to earn the 3% back by participating in the process. So we are either going to be at 85%, which means 15, or 88 and 12 for all employee groups.
So, and then second question, some of us were at the listening session with John Urbanbach and Diane Hasselbein on Saturday, and they shared the skepticism about the $60 million savings being captured due to how highly disruptive switching to self-insurance would be on the insurance industry, which is a rather big employer in the state of Wisconsin. So they shared that skepticism. So that's maybe a good idea to just withhold that.
Yes, and yes, we are hearing that from multiple individuals that there is serious skepticism over the $60 million savings with the self-insured. And one of the main reasons for that is with the model we have like in Dane County, discounts are provided when you see your doctor for, let's say, the Dean system when you have Dean health insurance. In self-insured programs, one of the major barriers to self-insurance is the discounts are not the same.
Yeah.
So that's why there's a lot of skepticism is in self-insured models, you typically don't see the carriers like the Dean or the UW system discounting the same to self-insurers compared to their own. However, both Dean and the UW system have been selected as self-insurance providers, so that may change that equation a little bit. Dave?
I couldn't understand the 12 and the 24 when I was trying to read it. I didn't get the impression that it's capped. This makes it look like it's capped. So at most they could pull back as 12 and 24 because there's been models on the self-insurance that it would actually cost more money, not only not save anything.
Yeah.
But if the costs went up, can that 12 and 24 go up? I couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, my understanding is the 12 on a statewide basis is tied to the 60 million, and it just doubles in the second year because the second year assumes you'd have the savings twice. So my understanding is it is directly connected to that, but it would be limited to 12. But my only I was just able to get that from the School Board Association. It may be different than that.
I heard the same as what you did, Steve, at our superintendent's meeting last Friday, where John Forrester was in attendance.
The other part where you have that the money has to be in direct proportion to the enrollment numbers at each individual school, I gotta admit, that sounds like a funny shell game set up in the end. I don't know how, is there any indication in there as to how they do that? Like, for example, you could make a pretty strong case that due to the construction and everything that we did this year, we spent a lot more money in the intermediate school than we did in other schools in the district. Therefore, how do you do that money and somehow keep that thing when you know you're actually spending more in certain schools than others?
Yeah, I'm glad
But is it
you,
only on the $200 number, or do we have to do it with all of our budget?
right, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a very unique element of this proposal as well, is what Dave is referring to is the statement that, in my understanding, it's just the increase, has to be directly allocated to individual schools based on their enrollment, really with a 3-year count. In effect, meaning you can't spend any of the additional dollars at Bethel Circle. You know, you can't take any of those dollars and use them to fund any programs here or in any central offices and school systems. What is really interesting about that provision is no schools report data to the state of Wisconsin at the school level. It's not even required to keep your records that way, let alone report it that way. So in our case, we do keep our records that way, but there is no mechanism to report that to the state of Wisconsin. So there would have to be some changes in school accounting and school reporting to even make that possible.
The comments I heard on Friday, Dave, were that it's already being discussed at the Capitol, that it's not reasonable because it's not how K-12 schools operate. So that's been a pervasive conversation in response to that. But again, we'll have to see how it shakes out. But I think there's a recognition that that's not how the dollars are necessarily channeled as far as how they're distributed or to a school or within a district.
I think Mark has a question.
Question one, it's my understanding from listening to John and Diane that this money is a one-time thing, that it's not going to carry over necessarily, so I assume that is going to weigh in how you're going to parlay it.
That's a good question. So from the beginning of the per pupil categorical aid, it has always been identified as sunsetting. So schools have always had to make a decision as to how to treat these funds. And given that it was the only source of increase that schools received in the years that this was proposed, schools really had no other choice but to assume this was going to continue into the future, given that the majority of our costs continue from one year to the next. So it has been a standard practice in school budgeting since the shift has gone to per pupil aid to assume in your budgeting practices that those funds will continue, even though legislatively it calls for the sunset of the funds.
And then the second concern, I've been reading in the paper, there are a number of legislative leaders who are saying they don't see how they can afford this and deal with the transportation issue. So, do you have a sense of the time frame before we're actually going to know what numbers we're going to have available?
It's a great question. There has been some comments made from Republican legislators saying that they would like to make changes to the governor's budget proposal. Some have suggested that there was too much of an emphasis on schools this time around and maybe not enough on areas like roads or transportation. I do know the governor has responded to those comments, saying that he expects his proposal on schools to move forward and would suggest other alternative changes. So depending on how you believe that political process will work itself out, we will continue to monitor this as we have in the past. But the interesting thing is in the last several budget cycles, the governor has started low and the legislature has moved it up. This session, the governor started, from what everyone else was expecting, high, And now there's some legislators discussing trying to lower it. So it's a complete reversal from what we've seen in previous years as far as the proposal, coming out of the governor's office. So for the school community, there has been, some statements by folks saying that this maybe wouldn't have been the preferred method. A lot of folks prefer the state equalization aid model, which is more balanced between communities across the district, and prefer the revenue cap model, which takes into account growth in school districts. But there has been a general consensus of positive support for the figure being $200 and then followed up by $204. So it certainly has been received very positively, from the education community. All right, Dave?
This isn't really a question, but two comments of something I think we've got to watch a lot is, when Act 10 first came out, it was considered a tool for school boards to use to make up money that the governor took away. Now it becomes you must comply with Act 10, which tells you always be careful of any policy you ever see that they're going to shift it from basically being supposedly a tool to becoming a mandate. And I really feel for the school districts that used what money they had, and the teachers that wanted to keep their benefit and maybe gave up pay raises again, and now the governor, after you gave up your pay raise, runs in and takes away the benefit again, which was the beginning of Act 10. And the second part is, to me, a real fear of how they're coming in with that language on having to put the money directly into the school based on your pupils. They're taking over the budget process at each individual school district. And we've talked last meeting about should we get involved legislatively and how we should, and is it worth our time, and is that our role? I think it's not a question of are we going to get involved, it's a question of are we going to be the school board determining how Waunakee Schools succeeds in budget, or are we going to sit back and just basically slowly let the state legislature and the governor become basically the new school board of Waunakee and every other school district? The argument has always been we had to do Act 10, we have to do all this stuff because there's all these failing schools in Wisconsin. But this hammer is not talking about failing schools anymore, it's we're taking over every school board. And this is our new policy, and this is how you're gonna run, whether you're failing or succeeding. It's hard to argue Waunakee isn't succeeding, and it's hard to argue that this isn't basically taking over our role of succeeding and basically replacing it. So as we look at our budget, I think we've got to start deciding how much of a role we want to keep with our budget versus how much we're going to keep losing control over.
I get what you're saying, but I don't see the difference between, the state has always dictated what you got, and that's always been the driver because they're the main other revenue source. So it either comes from the taxpayer or it comes from the state. In my mind, when I look at if everybody is on the same basis with Act 10 and the 12%, when we deal with teachers that we hire and everything, it's more even playing field because everybody's at the same thing. If some are giving extra benefits and this and that, then it comes into pay and all that. It's just part of that whole process. Interesting that they're pushing this to be equal, but it does give, and to me, when I look at it in competition for other teachers, it's a more even playing. It's if everybody's doing that, then that brings in the whole voucher thing, and private schools don't do any of that. And they might have healthcare, and they might not have. You can go all around with it. But I looked at it and I says, well, if they're all doing 12%, it's all that. Then it's teacher pay and where you are and what you do with your teachers. It's interesting how it goes. But you can look at it a lot of ways. But to me, the state always has been the one. All of a sudden, they give you this much this year or that much the next year, and they're always the driver on it.
Yeah, but you didn't have requirements like you have to spend it exactly equal based on head count.
It does seem to encroach on local control. If local control is the goal, and local school boards should know what's best for their schools, it feels like.
Okay, I think we'll continue some of this discussion maybe in the legislative discussion later, and let Steve continue moving ahead with his presentation.
I thought that'd be an interesting slide.
Yeah, we noticed it wasn't in here before. I was like, "Ooh, he had
Yeah, we
that."
had
How about
it.
a scary
We
story?
weren't sleeping.
What does this process look like? This is just the table of contents for the new revised budget process. But some of the additional data, I'm just going to show you a couple of, just a slide in each area. Some of the information that we're trying to pull out of Forecast 5. And as an example, in the past, the enrollment section of our budget planning process has more just been about numbers and tables and by grades. And we're trying to introduce, you know, deeper information into our budget planning process. And this is just an example of showing how our population has changed over a period of time by schools. The budget committee asked me to pull together a similar slide for the entire district, which would be a little bit easier to read, so I'll have that in the next version of the document. On the staffing side, I can very quickly pull together comparable data for whichever school districts we want to look at. The example here is the student-teacher ratio for similar sized Dane County Public Schools. You can quickly see, you know, Waunakee's at a 14.1 student-teacher ratio, Oregon's at 14.1, Middleton's at 14.0. We're right in the mix of what you see as kind of the average or the standard among schools in Dane County. Some historical data that we can pull from the system. The chart on the top reflects all district expenditures. As a district, we spend $11,732, which is just slightly below the state average. But the bottom chart really pulls out and shows what is our value with the money that we're spending, what's our priority. And on the left-hand side, it shows that on instructional expenses, Waunakee leads the county in the percentage of our budget dedicated to instruction. So we're at 57.29%, which is the highest percentage of any comparable Dane County school on dollars actually going towards the instruction category. Just examples of the interesting data we can pull out. From the budget forecast model, we can quickly see how legislative proposals affect the picture over a long period of time. In fact, next Monday night, I will be showing you comparisons of the model we were using, which was $100 per student on the revenue cap, compared to the governor's proposal, where you can instantly see the differences in all of these major areas. Again, just the big picture, what does that budget model look like as we move forward on our fund balance and surplus and deficit? What does the big picture planning process look like for 2017-18? Just to give you an idea of the numbers, the governor's budget proposal adds over $400,000 in revenues to our school district for the 17-18 school year, then compared to using $100 per student in the revenue cap. So a pretty significant increase in the proposal that we saw from the governor compared to what, you know, we were using in our budget planning model. Budget reallocation opportunities. This is going to be the section that I think is going to be the most interesting for, you know, not only our staff members at the meeting next week, our administrative team, board members, because we can very easily and quickly use reports to find anomalies in our budgeting practices compared to peers. We've actually also been able to find some new ways of showing this data, which is easier to read than these particular charts. But just as an example, this chart really references our utility expenditures as a school district. The orange dots are really the Waunakee Community School District, which really highlights that compared to Dane County Public Schools, we're on the high end for utility expenditure. I was able to dive in deeper into the system to find out exactly where it is, and it's really in the electrical area. It's not water, sewer, natural gas, it's electrical. and we're quite a bit off, so you'll see that information next Monday night, but we can very rapidly and quickly search for this type of information that we can share and then realize what are some of the areas we need to look at. What are our goals for 17-18? Again, to present a balanced budget, continues to move the district forward. We want to present a budget that includes improvements to educational programs, provide competitive salary and benefit increases to returning staff, and meets the needs of a growing student and increasingly diverse student population. We want to implement strategies and process improvements to reallocate existing budgetary funds to areas of greater priority. And this is a huge piece for us. We want to use the data coming from the Forecast 5 system to identify those areas where we are outliers, identify areas where the data is suggesting that we can and we should be doing better, to search for those improvements, find opportunities to reallocate dollars to areas of greater need and priority. Number 3, I'd like to send a team to the 2017 Forecast 5 National Conference to continue the development of our revised budget planning process. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
What team of people would you like to send to that?
So the product encompasses a wide variety of data. Academic data is a key piece of the product, so it's certainly appropriate for members of the curriculum team to come. Some schools were sending principals who were really into the data end on curriculum. HR, there's a tremendous amount of data in the HR area, tremendous amount of data in the finance area. School superintendents were attending, especially coming from the element of how this data can be shared with the community, how your budget process could be revised. So many schools were bringing 5 to 7 members of their administrative team, depending on the various sessions that were involved, really to just try to learn various ways to try to improve our processes here.
This year Steve went on his own. He kind of took the maiden voyage to see what that looked like, and while he was down there, emails, etc. were coming with some of the pieces that he found. And so I think as we've talked, it makes a lot of sense to have a team approach to really start having some of those dialogues while we have some of the folks who can help us to formulate and finalize our direction. It's been just in the little bit that we've done so far, and Steve's dove in a little bit deeper just from his experience. It's been a great place to be able to walk in and ask Steve a question about how do we compare in fill in the blank, and once he has a few minutes to go into the system, it pulls it out and puts it into a very organized format very quickly. And that was true to a couple of questions I asked him last week, which were very helpful in some of the discussions we were having.
This is a real powerful tool, obviously, and because it can aggregate data from multiple sources and analyze it. I know when these types of tools started coming into, in a former life when I was doing market analysis or sales analysis, when these types of tools were being able to access internal data or external data, the stuff that you can do with this is phenomenal. So I'm thrilled to see this available for school districts right now. So
It's generating the questions of not making a judgment of right or wrong. It's just, here's the data. What do you think about it? And the piece on instruction, where we put our dollars instructionally, being a leader in instruction, that means we're putting it into an area that I view as a core piece of our business, which is instruction of kids. So if we're putting more of our dollars there, I think that's an appropriate area. But it brings out those discussions as far as, well, what falls under there, and is that where we want those dollars allocated?
that's great.
Thank you for your time.
More to come on Monday night, sounds like. Okay, the March, feedback or input for the March report on the wellness.
One of the things that I think we'll continue to add into our strategic planning discussions is a little bit of a foreshadow of what's coming next month. In March, we are going to have a full report again on the wellness clinic. We'll be further along in that dialogue. Some of the things that we'll be talking about will be the construction process, some of the costs associated with the clinic space, the hiring of the clinic staff, timelines for opening, hours of operation, how we're communicating with district staff, management of furnishing supplies, and then some of the data that we'll be tracking to take a look at success and data from use and what we're seeing within the clinic walls. What I'd like to do at this point is to see, are there additional questions that the board would like to have addressed in that presentation so that we can meet expectations that you may have? If there's some questions that you're particularly interested in that we don't have listed in the initial ones that I laid out there, we'd just like to hear from you so that we can make sure we put the right information in the report in front of you for next month.
So I'll admit, I kind of requested this item go on there, and I don't mean to rework work that's already been done at the committee level or with the administrative team and working on it. It's just what I thought we committed to in November was the approval of the rental space and the costs, which had a goal and a cap on it in terms of renovating that space for the clinic at the Arboretum Center, and then the pay of one staff member to staff it. So it's just, I get why we're doing it, get why the model makes a lot of sense, I get why it's a great thing for our employees. I guess I'm just concerned how the costs get backstopped, and at what point is Dean, who we currently have agreements with, what point are they backstopping those additional costs? So I don't know if a contract's been developed, I don't know if it's in our best interest to have this done contractually or how, but I'm concerned that we're wading into being in the healthcare business, and that's where most of my concerns lie.
Right. Any other questions that, I think we'll do our best to try to answer those pieces, Julie, for you in next month's presentation. I think that was in line with some of the things that we had already discussed. Any other questions that other board members have that would be helpful as we have this discussion in March? I guess I would say if something does come up, please let us know. So we'll be putting between now and the March meeting, we'll be putting those pieces together and gathering that information for that presentation. So if there's additional questions or things that come up that you'd like to hear, if you can just shoot me an email, or it can go right to Steve Verticani.
Okay, agenda item D, starting with the state assessment and student achievement.
So what we started to do last year was to take the state assessment report and we formulated some different measures. We're not going to delve into every item on here tonight. This is really intended to be, kind of an annual digest and reference for us as we kind of look at the academic state of the district. And not that this captures everything, but to the extent we want to put everything in the master document, this is what we currently are providing. And certainly it's a living document. In response to your feedback last year, we kind of consolidated some of the secondary level grade reporting, and there's other things that we can do in the future. So,
push the top one first and then push
top
the,
one first,
and then.
And so again, the reason why we provide this report is to integrate in with our district vision and our district strategic planning process. We do strive to provide a well-rounded education. Not all of this is easily reduced to measurable objectives. This is just a take on providing some high priority indicators to you. And again, this is really in service to you and other stakeholders. So if there's information that you're interested in seeing in here that isn't, that feedback is always appreciated, and we can look at making updates to this document for the future. We do, on this as a recurring item towards the front, have 7, if you would, vital measures that we think kind of provide a very high-level summary on where we are. The percentage of our students that are completing high school within 4 years. Now, obviously, we have some students in transition programs that do not complete in 4 years by intention, but this is a common measure of high school completion. The percentage of our students, kindergarten through 6th grade, reading at grade level as we define it on our report card. Percent of students in both, for both reading and math that are meeting their growth targets on STAR and math. A percentage of our students taking algebra or higher for 8th grade math. Our percentage of students within a graduating cohort that meet all 4 ACT, college, and career readiness benchmarks. And also for our students that are continuing on to higher education, what is their persistence rate from their freshman to their sophomore year? And so we have these, most of them over a 5-year trend. 2 things I want to kind of call out on here are, first of all, an all-time high on the percent of our students in the class of 2016 that are meeting all 4 ACT, college, and career readiness benchmarks. Partly due to the fact that now in Wisconsin, all students have the opportunity to take the ACT as juniors. And secondly, that was a very strong cohort. A trend that we are watching, however, is the percent of students meeting their growth targets in math. Now you'll notice that it's very similar to our reading percentage, but there is at least a 3-year decline in there. That's something we want to monitor. Again, that 59% is above our expectation. The growth target is an average, so anything above 50 is an above average performance for a system. But that's definitely a trend that we're going to continue to look at. Some other items in the report that I kind of want to call out. As is typically the case, all of our state assessments are well above the state average. This is true both for our top line numbers and for students of color, low income, and students with disabilities. We've had a multi-year trend of increased student participation in advanced placement courses and concurrent enrollment courses with higher education, and they set new highs last year. The high school's percentage of DF grades has been on a multi-year decrease. This is a good decrease. Something also you'll note in almost every indicator is that we do have either achievement gaps or participation gaps for different demographic groups, so this needs to be a continued area of emphasis for us. One thing I want to spend just a little bit of time before we close this out and open this for questions tonight is the topic of a 5th indicator. If you remember a few months ago when we had the report cards in from the state, we had achievement, we had growth, we had closing gaps, all of which were on standardized assessments. Now, one thing the Wisconsin Accountability Design Team had as an aspirational goal when these report cards were designed several years ago was adding in expanded measures that would get beyond simply standardized assessments. And when Congress reauthorized the main federal education law last year, the new one is called ESSA, these call for states to adopt what ESSA calls 5th indicators of student quality or student success, the SQSS indicator. In his budget, Governor Walker recommended inclusion of 5 what we might think of as 5th indicators that he wants to see on future report cards. You have to see how those go through the budgetary process, but these are pretty typical. So if you were to compare the governor's list versus what's in your packet, you'll see that we do have a tracking measure on our concurrent enrollment. We have a tracking measure on youth apprenticeship, and we have a tracking measure on advanced placement courses and credits. 2 things that we do have data on internally, we don't put in the report. We probably need to look at increasing the visibility of these 2 measures, are community service hours and earned industry recognized credentials. Now in our system, None of these 5 indicators are requirements. These are things that students may choose to do. We don't have a community service requirement for graduation, for example. And although the state provides us an incentive, we don't require that kids in certain courses go out and take tests for industry-recognized credentials. We're happy to support them in doing it. It's a benefit to the student if they're going into the workplace, but it's not a requirement in our system. So this is just an area that's getting a little more attention at the state level and the federal level. Many of these are indicators we already track. So to kind of close it out, the one area where we did have a downward trajectory, the math growth measure, we have a few different things going on between introduction of new programs and increased professional development in math that we think will be effective in addressing this area. But we certainly are going to continue to monitor that local growth measure. Now, the state also has a growth measure called the value added on the report cards for both reading and math. And actually our math growth as measured by the state, on our local indicator, was very strong last year. Also, based on the data, we need to continue to work on ensuring equity for our kids, regardless of background, achievement, and participation. And we also need, in keeping with the previous slide, to be open to the possibility of adding additional data to the report if it's kind of a trend or if it's something that you as board members would find really beneficial. So that's just kind of a quick skim through this. This doesn't mean that we won't come back to this. This is something at certain points in curriculum committee or here when we have topics where this data is useful, we'll kind of go back to this as a reference point.
Is this something which is on the, or will be posted on the district website?
It will be after you've seen it tonight.
I think this is a remarkable improvement to what we've done in the past, and I think not only is it visually, you can capture things more easily. I think the range of indicators and measures is great. And it's obvious that you can go into more, but there's no need to put it in something like this. So I appreciate the efforts.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Dave?
I noticed in different parts you use the phrase low-income students and then other times economically disadvantaged. Is that because there were different standards for those two phrases depending on the area it was monitoring? Or is it the same standard in all the different indicators?
It's the same standard. Typically in the state assessments, they'll refer to those receiving food reduced lunch as the economically disadvantaged. It's, it's really as simple as this, Dave, and we can change this. Economically disadvantaged is a little longer than low income. So for some of the charts, they're a little cleaner if I go with low income.
I'm sitting here thinking there's a reason. It's like, oh, it all has to do with states.
There is,
on-
but it's probably a much less
It's in the
substantial
box.
reason than you might have been envisioning.
But
That's really
to
all
your
it is.
point, though, I mean, it really is, if that's what they call it on the assessment, you need to have reference to that for people to know what they're looking at relative to, if I'm comparing for another.
I gotta say, probably the one thing looking through this whole report that struck me, the one thing that we should be able to have almost more control over is low income or economically disadvantaged. I mean, it's purely a concept of resource versus home time management, whatever you wanna call it. But if there's one area it seems and throughout every single indicator, that is the group practically performing the worst, that has no physical reason or whatever that you have to overcome. It's purely almost a resource question. And I guess to me, it keeps bringing back the one-to-one concept or something like that we've talked about but never gotten there. Is that part of it or whatever? It just seems like one thing that if there was an area we could target that somehow we could have more direct control over, that seems to be an area that we should try harder in because that's the group that's performing the worst.
I agree with you, Dave. At face value, you're right. It should be a fairly direct thing to tackle. And I do think there are things like one-to-one where, if we set certain, just like we provide every student a textbook for a course, that sets an even playing field. we ask students and their families to buy calculators. But we provide calculators if a student needs them in class. But if you're that kid, you need to, and I think our teachers are very good about doing this in a sensitive manner, but the kid still has to, one, approach the teacher, and secondly, there may be, there's some self-advocacy. And, sometimes what might seem a little deal to us in front of peers might be a bigger deal for the kid. And we can't necessarily presume to know how that student is thinking. So I mean, I think, and the other thing is, I think we do a good job of putting opportunities out there. So we have a lot of mechanisms in place if a student meets these criteria for getting their AP exam or their CAT course at a lower rate, and in the case of the AP, we'll even pick it up. But again, for the kid who isn't always with a family that may not be as familiar with navigating the system, and again, some of these families, single parent households or parents who work in multiple jobs, we do need to be open to how we can help people access the kinds of supports we're trying to provide for our lower income kids. So, it seems straightforward, but unless you've walked down that path, sometimes the key areas to work on aren't always as obvious, and we need to keep doing better in that area.
I mean, I think almost every course I've seen we've added over the last couple of years, the technology requirement just keeps going higher and higher and higher and higher. Yet we're still doing cases of Chromebooks that you have in the classroom, but the minute you walk out of the classroom, you don't have it anymore. And I can't imagine a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grader going up and saying, can you give me a Chromebook to take home? I mean, it's just not gonna, that conversation's not gonna occur.
Yeah, I mean, that's a
Well,
key
if they
component
had
of the
it,
other.
they have the Wi-Fi to do it.
With the head.
How are we helping families access the Lifeline program for broadband? How, do we provide mobile hotspots for checkout? I mean, some districts do, we don't. I know that's something that as Herb takes the digital learning plan through its process over the next year, those are topics that I think are going to be looked at more from a staffing perspective. And as a board, that's something that you'll probably have an opportunity to consider some options for in the future.
I like that. Thank you. Yeah.
I found out at Invention, AT&T has some kind of program too, where if you're on free and reduced lunch, there's assistance to help with home internet service.
Yes, so, not to belabor.
It's another layer, yes, got it.
It's another layer, and actually the state is working on some ways to make it easier for families. But that's another topic I'd be happy to go into with Herb at another time.
And positively, I did really appreciate your breakout here, a percentage of students who took at least one fine arts, art or music class, and the same with the CTE, and the same with the world language, and the same with concurrent enrollment. So those were nice additions and good to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Summer school.
Tonight, Sheila's here to talk about, we're sitting in February and we're thinking of warmer weather and summer school classes and fees, so.
Isn't that good marketing for this weekend?
Yeah.
I tell you, we hope after tonight's board meeting, we'll be able to launch out to staff, getting them thinking about signing up to teach as well, so it all rolls together. Coming into this summer school, the way the calendar falls, we'll have 2 days off, so it always varies within our 6 weeks. So we'll have July 3rd and 4th off, and that kind of impacts those minutes of instruction at the end. But there's a couple of pieces in here that directly link to that. One is the fee for summer school is down a little bit this year because of 2 days off. They will not be doing their canoe trip. It's just what their coordinator kind of pulls out of the calendar, so they keep the rest of that going. So that's a good thing for the fee piece, and we'll see if the kids can live with that or not. They won't be canoeing and the fee goes down. We've added in a couple of new things. One thing that's interesting that we're piloting this year is we're bringing in Camp Invention. Julie, if you remember way back in the day, we couldn't
do it due to a DPI rule on maximum minutes of instruction and remain true to that program, and a change that happened in the law last year with maximum minutes allowed are letting us bring that in, and working closely with Steve and Camp Invention on how we can do that, so we're excited for that. It's been a very popular program in our district. It's going to be the 7th week of summer school, because in truth, what would have happened is so many kids enroll in that following summer school, which is when we've always had it the week right after. Had we put it right into the 6 weeks, it wouldn't have fit from a programmatic point of view, and it would have pulled away from our other classes. And so this retains that ability for families to tap into summer school and add that in, and so we'll see how that goes and if we'll expand that. My hunch would be looking at 10 years of data, because we've actually run it for 10 years, so we go way back. That will fill it, like we do with some of our other classes, and we'll have a waiting list, and that's true of other
Excuse me,
summer
what is
programming.
Camp Invention?
Camp Invention is like the precursor to Fab Lab and Maker Spaces and Project Lead the Way before that existed. It is all hands-on science and problem solving and critical thinking, but it's about the process of make something to fit the problem, try it out, tweak it, see if it works, tweak it. And the kids work through 5 different modules in their day-long piece. Like one of them is the entrepreneurial one is Duct Tape Millionaire. This year the curriculum changes each year, and honestly it is the best, most exhausting fun ever. So I'd encourage you to stop by during that week and keep the faith that for 10 years running, the building always looks normal by 5 o'clock on Friday when camp is done, because it doesn't during camp.
And I'll give appreciations to you, Sheila, for bringing that in and bringing that forward as an option this year, particularly as the state law changed. And thank you for making that available.
The other thing that you'll notice is at the high school level, expanding the online courses where Pathways still exists, but also online PE in its own place there, so we'll see how that piece rolls as well. And those are the highlights. I don't know if you have questions for me.
Well, if we can have, first of all, a motion to approve of the summer school classes and fees, and then if there's any other questions people can think about, that we'll discuss more.
So,
Second.
Dave, seconded by Mark. Any other questions or comments for Sheila? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks.
Okay, audit time. Or approval of the audit. We have all the materials that were in our packet. And it looks like there are some topics you want to talk about specifically.
I'll let Steve move forward with the discussion of the 15-16 audit.
Thank you, Randy. So in the extra section of board book, there were 2 documents that were added for the audit process. One was the financial statement, which was the very lengthy document. The other one was the auditor communication letter to the board. As I mentioned to the budget committee, the financial statements are quite difficult to interpret because auditors are required to basically follow national accounting standards from the Government Accounting Standards Board, and those often differ from Wisconsin's accounting system. And I gave some examples in your board book notes of some of the differences. As an example, one of them is depreciation. The national accounting standards require depreciation to be recorded in our financial statements, yet the state of Wisconsin does not require it. So you'll see differences in the documents from the auditors that are numbers and information you've not seen before because it's required to be reported in a certain way. In the financial statement, I did want to highlight, we did spend some time discussing with the budget committee some findings included on page 53 and 54. Those were related to an individual employee's state licensure. Connie Beth will be bringing forward that discussion with the HR committee. She does want to seek some feedback from the HR committee related to that topic and regarding some improvements we would like to make to the process. In the auditor letter, that includes information like recommendations in various areas. As an example, in the auditor letter, there was a recommended focus for internal controls. As we talked about earlier, internal controls is a box on the strategic planning process. We provided a presentation in November on that topic. In the auditor's letter, they have a suggested path for which internal controls should be updated first. So that's their recommendation to the board as to what process we should follow for the rest of this year and which ones we should prioritize to be updated. We did discuss that topic with the budget committee as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about either one of those particular documents this evening.
Any other comments from the budget committee? Yes, Julie?
I'd just like to share, so this is for the year that ended June of 2016. So if you take that back, that goes all the way back to July 1 of 2015. And I shared in committee, it frustrates me and disappoints me somewhat, this whole process and the way this report comes out. It is very difficult to navigate. And considering what we went through in that time span, I have the assumption that an outside audit committee helps keep you out of the weeds. And this is disappointing to me that not only did they not, in my estimation, but this report kind of makes very light of all we went through and all the changes we've made positively and things we've improved. And it feels like we're required to hire these people to do this. They do their job. It's a box checking job. It's very defined what they're supposed to look at, what they're supposed to report and what they're not. And the process really appears to me to be not that helpful. So I don't know if we can do anything about that. I'm just saying I will share my frustration. I don't know if it's unique to this particular company that does it, but this report was very disappointing to me in the light it shed or did not shed, or the help it gave or did not give us in navigating what we've been through.
And to Julie's comment, we are going through a bidding process for audit firms this spring. So our board policy on audit bids does require that process to take place this spring. I am going to be bringing forward specifications to the budget committee and then to this board before they do go out. There are opportunities in that process if the board would like to request additional services beyond some of the standard things that auditors more often look for. So we can continue that discussion at the budget committee level. I am looking to bring that forward later on this month at the next agenda item for the budget committee. But certainly we are in a position that if there are some additional services we would like to seek from the auditors, we do have that opportunity this spring with the bidding process coming where we can take a look at that.
So what I think I'm hearing then is basically what we are currently receiving is really what we would expect for the service that we've contracted with them.
Yeah, so in the last bidding process that we followed, we took the standard specifications that the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction puts out, sends it out to the audit firms that are identified on their website that are out involved in auditing schools and receive the responses back. But to Julie's point, you can request additional services, and that's something we could discuss. For example, consulting in particular areas, deeper reviews of particular areas, but that would need to be requested above and beyond the Department of Public Instruction document. And when all schools bid audit services out, basically they go to the DPI's website, pull off their auditor specifications, and then may make some changes to that document for anything that that particular board is looking for. So we would have that opportunity coming up later this month or in the next month to go ahead and choose to do that.
And And I'm assuming then if you feel that there's also a need for anything, that you would be the, speaking up at that time as well.
So one of the things, just as an example, that we do ask for that's above and beyond is the depreciation schedule. Since in the state of Wisconsin it's not required, our accounting system is not set up to do that. So we do ask for the audit firm, and many schools do, to provide that depreciation system. So that's one example of something that you do and can ask for from them. To the point that Julie was making, she's referring more towards the management letter piece, which is more in the areas that are a little bit more outside checking the boxes of what the state and federal government's requiring. So there certainly are areas in there that we could ask for some additional review, which would certainly be appropriate, and we would get quotes back from the audit firms on being able to do that.
And I'm concerned with celebrating the good news that we did in terms of our cash management. That was huge, and I mean, it wasn't even noted, the great improvements we made and the changes we did that positively impacted.
Any other comments for Steve? You are looking for an approval of the 2015-16 audit report then, as presented, right?
Yes.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other questions or comments? Other than the fact that, once again, thank you for the work that you do. And obviously the letter does also indicate the extent to which we actually, the types of things that come up. I mean, it's really, we always get very good reviews on the work that's being done. So appreciate that. And
Thank you.
no such disagreements arose during the course of our audit. Yay. Okay, any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Resolution, there's a resolution regarding the authorization of the reduction of general obligation refunding bonds dated August 15th of 2007.
And this is a conversation that really goes back, I think, over a year with regards to a review of our debt service with regards to Bethel Circle. Steve has done some work on this and is bringing forth this resolution to really move forward with that aspect of paying off that obligation and that debt. So Steve, I'll let you walk through exactly what you have in the packet and what we're asking of the board tonight.
Thank you, Randy. Just for a little bit of background, what this loan is really referring to is the purchase of this building at Bethel Circle. So when this building was purchased, the school board went out using Fund 38, which is a fund available to school boards to borrow basically $1 million without going to public referendum. Back in 2007, the school board chose that option. We created a Fund 38. We're on a 20-year payment schedule to pay off the cost of Bethel Circle. Last year, during the discussion phase, I think at a budget committee meeting, a couple of members said, would we have the opportunity to potentially pay off that loan, reduce our future budgetary cost, and based on those questions, we did come back to a budget committee meeting, share information from our financial advisors, which I've included for your review tonight. Basically, to spend about $607,000 of district cash now, we would save $818,000 in future costs. So to come up with the $607,000 in district cash now, we would be utilizing what's referred to as our fund balance. And as we have talked in the past, our fund balance percentage has increased over a number of years. It has reached a current level of 20.8%. At that current level, there would be no concerns with still meeting the school board's policy goal of 15% and utilizing the excess funds to pay off this loan. The positive in doing so, first of all, you can see the direct fiscal savings moving forward. The second would be the fund, as the Fund 38 loan would disappear, Fund 38 is within the district's revenue cap formula, meaning the repayment of that loan utilizes funds that cannot be spent anywhere else. Unlike Fund 39, which is outside of the revenue cap, these funds directly impact funds available in Fund 10, which is our district's educational budget. So by investing the $607,000 now, we have the future savings, but we also have the redirection of the funds out of a Fund 38, which is for a loan, and into Fund 10, which is the educational budget. So I did include some information in your board book notes as to where we are in fund balance. Fund balance has also been set aside for Warrior Stadium, which we discussed earlier tonight. Fund balance has been set aside towards other building and department carryover funds. We are in a strong fiscal position when it comes to fund balance. And thanks to the suggestion from the Budget Committee, we have this opportunity in front of us tonight, which we are in the fiscal position to be able to follow through on. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this topic.
Dave?
Okay, so our fund balance generates about what interest rate? Probably 1% or less nowadays.
Right now, we're at 0.6%.
The bond market's so wonderful. So, I was just playing with the numbers, so we'd be saving about 3.5% interest per year and giving up 0.6. Okay. Make a motion for the resolution.
Second.
Dave seconded by Julie. And the resolution is authorizing the redemption of general obligation refunding bonds dated August 15th, 2007. That wording. correct?
Yes, that one.
Okay.
That one.
Okay, is motion and second. Any further discussion? I know we've talked about this actually the last couple of years, so. Hearing none, do we need any roll call on this or no?
We typically do on financial
Yeah, I think we do.
resolutions, so I would suggest just
If you do it, then you
just
already
doing
do
it.
Well, I know, that's just it. We're gonna
Just
do it.
roll call.
Okay, so roll call. You want-
Betcher,
Aye.
Ensign,
Aye.
Epping,
Aye.
Heineman,
Aye.
Hetzel,
Aye.
Hilbrunning,
Aye.
Weiner.
Aye.
Motion's carried.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Do we have to do the second resolution? Or is it-
That was it.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, on to approval of new clubs and organizations.
Normally, new clubs run through the co-curricular committee first. This was one that I did not run in that direction. I brought it straight to the board. I think we had discussed this as a potential club that would be being brought forward after we approved the Young Republicans Club this fall. This is the Young Progressives Club, a number of kids who are obviously signed up for this. So our recommendation would be to approve this club so that we can continue to
Make
support
a
this.
motion to approve the club moving forward.
Thank you.
Second.
Jack and Dave. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Other correspondence.
Other correspondence you'll see in your packet, you'll see an announcement of a grant that was received by Tina Trimbauer, our accounting teacher, so congratulations to her. You'll also see a correspondence from the Building Bridges program and our executive, Joe Parisi, that we were selected to partner with the county on the Building Bridges program. Executive Parisi will actually be here at our next meeting in March to just talk a little bit about that program. From what Kurt's contacts have been and other districts who've been in part of the first iterations of it, it's been very well received. So as we're going through our budget process, you will see this as a cost-sharing measure for us to help to provide some additional supports to our students' mental health needs.
Hey, Julie?
Do we know the amount of the grant that the accounting teacher got?
Do you know, Brian, offhand? I don't.
Hundreds,
It wasn't listed in-
Millions?
I don't think it was on the letter.
Optimistic, I guess. What Tina's done, I wanna say it's roughly and maybe around that upper hundreds of thousand range. What she's done the last 2 years with it is, 2 years ago, she had, she took the students on basically, it was 2 years ago, I might have my years mixed up here. 1 year she had accountants come in, set them up in the commons and have the students had the opportunity to go through a round table, and the accountants that came in were served breakfast by the students in the post-grad program. So that funded the cost of the food and, you know, making the arrangements that way. The other time, because this will be the third year that Tina's gotten the grant now. The other time that she received the grant, she actually took students out, like basically to a series of accounting firms so that the students could be on site and give them the opportunity to have some insight that way. So it's usually enough to cover, I would say, transportation on one side of things for like a bus or that type of thing, or on the other side of things, like I said, the cost of having a nice breakfast and nice atmosphere for them when they came in.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. I sat at the breakfast last year, I think is when she
That
held
was
it.
breakfast last year.
Yeah,
2
and
years
it
ago,
was
so-
kids broken up into smaller tables with different CPAs, accountants from the community saying, here's what my job is, here's what I did, here's what my training was, here's my recommendations to you, here's how you can get involved, here's some of the thoughts on schooling, etc.
So both thank her and congratulate her, that's
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Thanks, Brian, for filling in the blanks there.
Okay, on to committee reports, starting with budget. The minutes are in our packet, and it looks like the one action item is a transportation bid process, right?
Yeah, so if I can just comment on that. So the transportation bids are scheduled to go out tomorrow, if approved by the board tonight. We did make the change as discussed at the last regular board meeting, as an alternate bid. The budget committee did see the full transportation bidding process at their last meeting, had a chance to review it. We did reach out to the Wisconsin School Bus Association, made them aware of the fact that we are going through the bidding process, and actually we've been contacted by a number of vendors that are interested in receiving our information tomorrow. We do believe this is going to be a very successful bidding process. There's a lot of interest right now. And upon your approval tonight, the information will be distributed tomorrow, and we will, begin moving through that process. There is a timeline that's included in the process if you're interested in seeing some of the key dates. But once it goes out tonight, the information will eventually be presented back to the budget committee and then ultimately on to the full board for consideration.
So you need a motion for that?
Our request is for a motion from the board to approve the bidding process and the bidding packet going out tomorrow.
So
Dave seconded by Mark. Any questions for Steve on this? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. And that's the only item on the budget committee other than what we talked about. Curriculum. The minutes are in the packet, and there's information on the online PE.
So, Mark, you can certainly chime in, or other members of the committee, but, I would say the main thing regarding online PE is we updated kind of the information, in particular the fiscal aspect. At the curriculum meeting, we had a survey we put out earlier this month. It wasn't available for that meeting, but we put the results in board book. We surveyed middle school and high, parents of students in middle school and high school through Infinite Campus Messenger. We emailed high school students with a very similar survey. Survey actually, in addition to these questions on online PE, had some more general questions about online courses that we'll be bringing into the curriculum committee at the next meeting. It'll also compare back to a similar survey we did back in 2011 before we started the membership with eSchool. But I think the key thing that I took away was, first of all, when you look at where kids were and where parents were, the percentages were very consistent between students and parents. In general, there seems to be significant interest in making online PE available in the summer session. There is a fairly limited appetite for the regular school year if it results in a student overload. That was running around 22% as an option. And there was a small percentage of students and parents who felt that it really shouldn't be an option at all, but they were definitely a minority. So, you know, my suggestion would be, and we're already seeing more kids put in for the summer piece. My suggestion would be that we definitely go ahead and look at expanding the offering of this during the summer. And I would recommend that be a good first step for this year. If we wanted to go for a variety of reasons, both because that's where the survey support is, and it probably is the most fiscally suitable move for us. I would say start there, and then we can kind of evaluate how that goes and steps for next year. And then at the meeting, we also spent some time in EduClimate and a few other things.
And that's more of an informational piece as it is in status, no action.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Tim.
Okay, the HR, facilities, HR committee, you'll see the minutes in our packet, and there's one action item which we're bringing forward to the full board, and that's a long-term, a limited-term employment position for a couple of individuals with special needs.
Yeah.
I think the information you want.
What you see in your packet is a memo from Tom Grunder. He's our transitions teacher. Part of what Tom's job is to work with our students 18 to 21, and her focus being really getting kids out into the community, working in job experience positions, preferably paid job positions. We have them throughout our community and region in Madison area. What Tom approached me with and Connie with was with regards to two students who we currently have doing some volunteer work at Prairie Elementary, delivering some mail, doing some of those type of activities. And he approached us about really creating two positions that would be 2 hours a day, continuing even as the students would progress on outside of the transitions program. And I think that from my perspective, it was a recommendation that I support, and I brought it through the HR and the budget committee and received favorable responses to that as well. I think the parameters we put on it as I walked through that process was that this would be, if there was transition as far as somebody leaving that position, that we would bring that back for further consideration, and that there'd be a point where we can talk about really how this program is working within our district. But right now it would be for two students, 2 hours per day each, and that's at a minimum wage. So our recommendations from the committees were to bring it here for your consideration.
Motion to approve as presented.
Second.
Any further comments?
Can I ask a question? So it's looking like the county is paying 100% the first $500, right?
Correct. That's
And
correct.
your work, and it's gonna be about 10 hours a week for each of them.
Yes.
So that's 20 hours total a week. They're not gonna hit the 500 hours next year.
Probably not, no.
So really, the county's paying for this whole thing.
For this fiscal year, and then as we move forward, we'll have some costs moving forward. There's also a job coach that is with them that is from the county.
So again, not a cost.
Right, and then that's not a cost to us. This is really a piece as you're transitioning from the K-12 piece to the county piece. And as they continue outside of our transitions program, that is something that would continue within the support from the county.
Well then, I guess I was a little curious. I saw some comments in the HR committee about not wanting this to increase beyond these two positions.
Right, because there would be a cost. The cost as far as once you get beyond the 500 hours, then that is a cost of ours. That's, we pay their salaries, their minimum wage for those 4 hours a day for the two people.
So we're talking, so once they become adults in June,
Right.
they're gonna keep working
They would
within the
continue.
school district.
Sure. Right.
And then they would be off this $500 from the county. That's when we would start
First
paying.
500 hours is picked up by the county, and then after that, we start paying, correct?
Okay.
Does that answer it?
Mark?
And then if one or both would choose to do something else, then would we look to replace them, or it's just for these two?
I think that would be something that we would look at from, I think Tom would look at the needs of the kids. It's very specific to what the students are looking at from experiential. And I would say if that type of transition took place, I would at least bring it back here as an informational item and see if we want to continue, or give you an update on how it's going. But I think from my perspective, we have a lot of businesses that are supportive of this program, our students, and I think as appropriate here with some of the kids to have them, I think that's a positive piece for them and for our students at the elementary level.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. I did just want to point out, there were other topics that were discussed, and you'll see some of this stuff is going to be coming to the board later because it's language and existing handbooks and things. So if you have any other questions, any of that, feel free to contact Connie Beth as well. Okay, Facilities Committee.
The Facilities Committee item that you see in front of you tonight is a facility improvement for the dance cheer room. This was one that was in front of you last month, but we did not have all of the information, so it was tabled. This is really placing down a cushioned floor, and that's currently concrete. It's totally being paid for by I believe the dance and cheer team. So our recommendation is for approval of this tonight, so we can move forward with that improvement.
Is there a motion to approve this facility improvement request?
Second.
Mark and Dave, any questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Consent agenda. Several items on the consent agenda, checks, finance reports. There's a request for renewal of a co-op. And apparently the other district is not going to be a part of it, so it's the request as it was presented in board book.
This is just for Waunakee to Forest as it has been.
Yeah. Yep, and then there are some gifts and there are no field trips, but they're gifts. There's a $400 from the Waunakee Lions Club, Rotary Foundation, $1,000 from Dave's Certified Auto, and also recognition for some of the Cops for Kids support for our students, in the amount of $7,607 so far, which is really something. So basically, consent agenda to approve all of these unless you want to pull something out for separate consideration.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Dave and Jack, any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. We have already, well, actually, any other board business, conventions, workshops, the only thing I want to give everyone a heads up for is that there's the visit to the Capitol. That's March something, I can't remember, everybody's hearing about that. I've done that a few times, it's actually quite interesting.
I think it's 15.
It's a 15.
15?
Perhaps this time.
Yeah, I mean, it really, it's, if you haven't done it, and you haven't gone through that process, it's actually pretty interesting. I mean, WSB does a pretty good job of, really kind of helping prepare and set the stage in terms of getting the appointments for you as well. So, there's often some good presentations, overview of what's going on, and some tips and techniques. And there's also, you get a really neat handbook, which is actually available online on the WSB website, like an advocacy handbook kind of thing, which is always available. So if you're interested, I guess you would sign up through Rebecca. I mean, have you seen, I'll give you the information on it.
Thank you.
Well, there's a link, but I think there's a fee also, so we'll just make sure we run it through Rebecca. And it's the Day at the Capitol event on the WSB website in March or something. Yes?
Is it appropriate to comment if we went to the legislative listening session and a couple of comments?
Well, actually, yeah, because the next item is legislative update.
Oh, okay.
This one was just kind of conventions and workshops. So, go ahead, legislative update.
It was interesting to go, and the question that I had for both John and Diane was, what's effective? How do we make our point of view known in a way that can be heard? And what they both said was they thought writing letters was very, very effective. And they said, don't just do it to the senators and representatives in your district. Do your homework and find out who's on which committees and direct it to all the people on the committees. And they also said it doesn't hurt to just cover the list. So if it's a topic you're particularly passionate about, I was surprised that that's what he said, and they also said, letters to the editor and the newspaper, which of course we write as people, individuals. So,
And what does happen is that they do keep track of how many comments on certain topics, and there are people on their staff who will do that, so that's why I'm sure that mention is made with respect to, hey, we've got so many contacts. Any other comments on the listening sessions? And what I did include, as I mentioned before, I think you'll find it some interesting reading, the John Forrester's SAE legislative update. You'll see my handwritten notes on the side, and it's interesting, you made the comment about the delegate assembly. There's just a small group of people who are making noise on the guns in schools thing, so. Anyway, this website is actually very helpful as well to go to as well, and it's got a good blog.
If I can just add a couple other things, Peggy, I think Steve hit some of the financial aspects in his presentation, but other things to just be watching for. There were some measures within the budget proposal that were also tax relief issues with regards to general aids and the school levy tax credit, some additional increases in those areas to reduce property taxes down. Dollars set aside in there for school mental health, looking at some things with social worker incentives and school-linked mental health, trauma-informed care, some of the things I know Kurt's been very involved with and been leading some discussions in our district. There's some dollars set aside for that in the budget proposal. The early college credit program, this is really the bringing back, I believe, the part-time open enrollment, all of those aspects that allow kids to really receive additional credits from another institution other than the one that they attend. There's some proposals to really kind of link some of those together and make it more streamlined. So it's, I believe, all the youth options, course options, all of those type of things. So that they're calling it the early college credit program. And then there's some changes to teacher licensure as far as removing the renewal, the 5-year renewals, so that once you receive your license, that would be a perpetual license, and it goes back to the lifetime licenses, so that there's not a 5-year renewal. So those were some of the pieces that were also included in the budget document that jumped out as impacts for us.
The other thing that got mentioned that I would think that there would be agreement across party lines on is that one of the tax relief measures, and it's, I forget the name of the House bill, or the number of the House bill, but it sounds like it's manufacturing and ag credit, and it amounts to over $20 million of tax relief. And when they've dug into that, it's going to 11 different people in the state of Wisconsin. So that $20 million of tax relief is being handed out directly to only 11 people.
And you have to have 30
30 million
to apply.
to apply to get it.
Talk
So-
about targeted.
That would
It's a
seem to be an
very
issue that
targeted
we could
group.
all agree could be
Wow.
dealt with, not responsible.
Yes, Dave.
Just from having the fun of doing a lot of legislative visits on legislative day for different groups. The biggest thing is if you're gonna go and you go in and you say something to that legislature, whether it's about property tax relief, whether it's about the $200 per pupil per year, or whether it's about the start date for school, get them, ask them what is their position and how
Yes.
they
How do you
feel
plan
about
to
voting.
vote? Yeah.
Until you ask that question, they're just gonna give you a nice smile and say thank you, and you're gonna have no idea what they're gonna do. So try to get them to at least commit or say where they're leaning. The second thing is, there's gonna be a lot of spin on this budget. I think someone wrote very well that this is called a election year budget. There's gonna be a lot of talk about this $200 and the $400 and how this is a great increase into funding and pushing public education. And I think we all have to remember what was back in 2010 and start to sit there and go, you know what, if somebody steals $100 from me and comes back 7 years later and hands me $15 and then tells me how I have to spend it, that's not really giving me my money back. You know, you're still out 85 and now the 15 you have is being very targeted and required. And the third thing is, that I was kind of surprised they haven't mentioned it here, but you gotta watch one issue, and maybe even ask them about it if you're there, is the higher education issue where they are going to have performance-related funding to the UW. To me, that's part of what we're seeing in the $200 is that you have to spend it this way. Right now, they have a thing in there that the university has to spend the money and has to show how they're getting a 4-year degree down to 3 years. They want college degrees down to 3-year degrees. And that scares me down the road, because once they do it to the UW, and they say, look how successful this was, and how many kids are getting out and getting into the workforce, and then they turn around, and they were talking about youth apprenticeship and all the other stuff, and they start going, how come you can't get your kids out in 3 years if they're just doing youth apprenticeship? How come you can't get high school kids out faster? You know, and you were talking about how you like the fact that you're seeing kids taking fine arts and all the other stuff. They're pushing the colleges, you gotta put them directly into a career. Don't waste a year talking about humanities. Don't waste that time. And I fear with some of his new 5th requirement, or 5th status, that's where he's starting to look. And it's gonna start, if they do it to higher ed, give them 4 years, it'll come down to K-12.
Good point.
Yeah, you look at some of the other states around the country.
So I would seriously ask some of those legislatures, just as an aside, to say, well, how do you feel about that? About pushing that higher ed down to 3 years from 4 years? Because that's basically what a high school is.
I just want to go back to is if take some time to read through what he's got, but like suggestions also, like the start date repeal, you know, where our position is on something like that. And I don't know, maybe I can ask this already, is there, one of the bullets is walk through your revenue cap worksheets with your legislators. So I mean, what everybody always says is it's much, you can say something, but if you can tell our stories as it relates specifically to your district, that always is an easier way to remember what you told them. So to the extent that we can talk about what happened as a result of, or what we're not gonna be able to do unless you do this, it's much easier to do. It's much more effective in terms of getting the message through. To be continued. Okay, we've got all the meetings scheduled.
I do have, there's the 3 special meetings which need action.
And we need one, yes.
So we have the February 20th, which I think we've already acted on. So February 20th is the special board meeting on the budget workshop. We have March 16th, special board meeting for superintendent and board evaluation purposes. And then March 27th is a special meeting as needed for finalization of Warrior Stadium bids.
And that could potentially be canceled depending on.
Could be, yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, so is there a motion for those 2 special meetings, March 16th and the 27th?
So moved.
Second.
Mark and Jack, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
And then all of the committee meetings that we set prior to us starting off here, we will send out calendar invites, and I have all those, Rebecca.
Okay.
So we will get those off tomorrow.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Want me to get these or no?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Wow, is that the release?
We got a lot of stuff.
You got it ready to roll.
So what time are you leaving?
So this is.